The day started like any other on the giant interstellar council station, but there was something different in the air. The long glass corridors, the glowing signs, the soft hum of machines, and the steady movement of life from across the galaxy all felt a bit tense. It was as if the entire place was waiting for something unexpected. And in a small transport shuttle approaching the docking area, the Earth ambassador sat quietly, watching the massive structure grow larger through the window dot to anyone looking. From the outside, the ambassador appeared calm, maybe even casual. The hands were gently folded, the expression relaxed, and the breathing steady. They had been through many meetings before, some friendly, some stressful, but this one was special. This meeting would gather every major species of the Council, each with their own long history, their own habits, and their own political issues. Earth was still considered young in interstellar affairs, so being invited at all felt like a rare opportunity. When the shuttle doors opened, the ambassador stepped onto the platform. Bright blue lights traced the edges of the walkway, and the smooth metallic surface gave a faint reflection of every step. Several officers from different species stood nearby, waiting to escort members to the council chamber. The ambassador adjusted the strap of the small data bag and followed the guide assigned by the station. The walk to the chamber took several minutes, but the ambassador didn't mind. It gave time to observe quietly. Everything looked bigger than anything one would ever see back on Earth. Tall figures from distant planets passed by. Some walked on two legs, some floated gently, and some moved with soft mechanical sounds. The ambassador noticed the way they looked at each other, the way their expressions shifted, and even the way they glanced toward Earth's representative as they walked past. There were whispers, too. Some were quiet enough to ignore, but the ambassador still caught pieces of them. Earth is new here. Humans are unpredictable. Why did they send only one representative? Do they really think they belong in this meeting? None of it was surprising. Earth had been building its place slowly, trying to prove that humans could contribute something meaningful in a galaxy full of species that had thousands of years of political experience. When the ambassador reached the large entrance of the council hall, the doors opened with a soft tone. The chamber was wide and round, with tiered rows of seats that rose like steps inside a stadium. Each seat was designed for a different species. Some tall, some low, some fitted with water tanks, and some with extra room for wings or mechanical limbs. At the center was a circular area where speakers would stand. The ambassador walked to the assigned seat, one that looked simple compared to the others, but perfectly comfortable. As they settled in, they noticed the way several representatives looked at them. Some curious, some doubtful, some clearly amused. Across the room, two species known for their long-standing disagreements exchanged looks full of suspicion. Another representative adjusted a translator device, muttering about how Earth's language always confused the machine. But the ambassador didn't get distracted. They simply kept watching, quietly reading the room. Years of human history had taught one thing very well. In every meeting, what people say matters, but what they don't say matters even more. As more representatives filled the room, the sound grew louder. Conversations overlapped, signals beeped, and translators hummed. The ambassador sat still, absorbing everything. They knew every species' style of communication, their political behavior, and their typical reactions. Earth may have been new, but humans had done their homework. The council leader finally entered, signaling the start of the meeting. The room fell into a respectful silence. Even the species known for their restless movements paused. The leader's voice echoed gently through the chamber as they welcomed everyone and reminded them of the purpose of this gathering. A rising threat had been reported in a distant sector of the galaxy, and decisions needed to be made about how to handle it. When the leader mentioned Earth, some representatives shifted in their seats. A few exchanged small smiles, as if expecting Earth's representative to offer nothing meaningful. Earth had technology, Yes, but it didn't have centuries of space presence like the others. The ambassador didn't react to any of it. Instead, they focused on the conversation, listening carefully as the first species took the floor. The representative of a tall, shimmering species spoke about the possible danger. They described unusual activity in the outer sector, something they believed might lead to conflict. Their voice was smooth but nervous. The ambassador noticed the way their hands kept moving, the way their eyes avoided contact with certain species, and the way they kept emphasizing the danger without offering solutions. After them, another species spoke, dismissing the threat as exaggerated. They argued that the outer sector had always been unstable, and sending resources there would be a waste. But even as they spoke confidently, their body language showed something different: unease, maybe insecurity. The ambassador knew some of their past decisions had not gone well, so their confidence was probably just a mask. One by one, each representative shared their views. Some talked about fear. Some talked about politics. Some argued just for the sake of arguing. A few minor species stayed silent, clearly afraid of offending anyone. The ambassador kept taking mental notes. Every word, every pause, every expression was a piece of a larger picture. The tension between certain species was obvious. Old rivalries made cooperation difficult. The ambassador noticed how quickly two particular species tried to blame each other, how defensive one became whenever conflict was mentioned, and how another kept quietly observing everything while saying almost nothing. During one exchange, the two rival species started arguing louder and louder. Their voices echoed through the chamber, and even the calmest representatives looked uncomfortable. The ambassador didn't interrupt or show any reaction. Humans had seen enough internal conflicts in their own history to recognize where this argument was heading. It was predictable, almost too predictable. The council leader tried to restore order, tapping a control panel that dimmed the lights for a moment. The room quieted again. Everyone's attention returned to the center, but the tension remained like a thin, invisible fog. When the leader finally asked Earth's representative if they had anything to say, the ambassador simply offered a polite nod. Instead of answering right away, they took a moment to look around. They looked at each species, not with fear or challenge, but with genuine understanding. Earth's role wasn't to overpower anyone. It wasn't to pretend humans knew everything. Their purpose today was simply to show that humans were prepared, aware, and willing to contribute genuinely. The ambassador finally spoke, but the voice was soft and steady. They didn't brag. They didn't compete. They didn't try to sound superior. They simply shared Earth's perspective calmly, clearly, and without judgment. Even those who doubted Earth found themselves listening without realizing it. As the ambassador continued, some representatives started whispering again, but their tone was different now. It wasn't dismissive. It was curious. They noticed the way the ambassador carried themselves, the quiet confidence, the controlled expression, the careful choice of words. Nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive, just a steady presence that somehow stood out in a room full of powerful and experienced species. The meeting moved on, but something had changed. The ambassador could feel it. The tone in the room had shifted, even if only slightly. Humans were no longer being seen as outsiders. They weren't fully accepted yet, but at least the door had opened a little dot as the discussion continued. The ambassador leaned back slightly and let the others debate. They had done what they came to do for this part of the meeting: observe, learn, and show that Earth was not here to cause trouble. They also knew something the others didn't, that Earth had spent years studying every species, learning their behavior, their history, and their patterns. They knew that if things ever took a dangerous turn, humans would not be caught unprepared. But that part of the story would come later. For now, this was enough. The ambassador remained quiet, letting the council continue their discussions, all while keeping a calm, unreadable expression. The day was only beginning, And the ambassador knew there was much more to reveal as the meeting went on. This was just the first step in showing the galaxy that humans were paying attention, and that they were far more ready than anyone expected. After the initial introductions and pleasantries, the council members settled into their seats, but a quiet tension filled the air. The Earth ambassador, sitting calmly among beings from dozens of species, noticed that many of the older, more experienced representatives were already exchanging looks that said more than words could. Some of them leaned slightly toward each other, whispering in their own languages, while others simply observed, scanning the room with careful scrutiny. Even though Earth was still considered young in interstellar affairs, the ambassador understood that this was the moment where reputation mattered more than anything else. The first of the older representatives to speak was a tall species with elongated limbs and shimmering skin. Their voice had a smooth tone, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism as they addressed the council. "We have gathered here to discuss a matter that affects the security of the outer sectors," they said, their words slow and deliberate. "It is our duty to ensure that no inexperience endangers our plans or resources. Earth, while appreciated for its presence, has little history in handling matters of such scale." The words were polite on the surface, but the tone carried a clear meaning. Many in the room had come with centuries of experience and complex alliances. They were confident, even arrogant, in their understanding of how the galaxy worked. Some of them had never considered Earth as a serious player, thinking that humans were too new, too untested, too unpredictable. The ambassador listened quietly, letting the words flow over them without reacting. Every gesture, every pause, every nuance in the voice of the speaker was being carefully recorded in the ambassador's mind. Humans had learned long ago that people often reveal their true intentions not in what they say, but in how they say it. A few moments later, a representative from a species known for their sharp intellect and cunning entered the conversation. Their speech was quick, precise, and filled with a kind of subtle mockery. "Yes, Earth has its curiosities," they said, smiling thinly. "Its people have survived on a small, fragile planet. But surviving alone on a planet is very different from surviving among species that have faced threats across galaxies for millennia. Do you truly think you can contribute meaningfully to our discussions?" Some members chuckled quietly. Others shook their heads, convinced that Earth's ambassador would struggle to respond. A couple of younger species exchanged glances, curious to see how this unknown representative would handle the pressure. The ambassador did not rush to speak. Instead, they took a deep breath, letting the room settle. They could feel the impatience and doubt hanging in the air, but rather than reacting emotionally, they simply observed. They noted the patterns, how some species spoke louder when they were uncertain, how others tried to assert dominance through interruptions, and how a few chose silence to mask fear or inexperience. As the discussion continued, it became clear that some species were beginning to underestimate Earth's representative. They interrupted frequently, thinking that their long history gave them authority. They talked over each other, making points that were more about showing knowledge than solving the actual problem. The ambassador, however, remained calm, quietly collecting information and analyzing the dynamics in the room. At one point, two species began arguing about past conflicts that had occurred in the outer sectors. One tried to accuse the other of negligence, while the other defended itself, pointing out errors from centuries ago. The ambassador noticed the way both parties were stuck in their own perspectives, repeating the same accusations without offering solutions. This was predictable behavior, a cycle that the ambassador had seen in countless meetings and conflicts throughout Earth's history. While these exchanges continued, a few minor species remained silent, seemingly afraid of being drawn into the argument. They shifted in their seats uncomfortably, watching the larger, more dominant species with apprehension. The ambassador, observing quietly, understood their hesitation. In a room full of history and power, it was easy for smaller voices to be overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. The ambassador's calm presence began to stand out as a contrast. Unlike the others, they did not raise their voice or interrupt. They did not compete for attention or try to dominate the conversation. Instead, they simply remained composed, giving the impression of someone who had confidence but not arrogance. It was subtle, but some of the council members could feel it. It was as if Earth's representative was quietly reminding everyone that there was another way to engage, a way that was thoughtful, careful, and deliberate. The council leader, sensing the growing tension, turned to the ambassador. "Earth," they said, their voice neutral but curious, "you have listened to the concerns of others. What is your perspective? How do you see this situation affecting your planet and your people?" The room went silent for a moment. Several representatives exchanged glances, expecting a hesitant or defensive response. They assumed that Earth, being young and inexperienced, would struggle to provide a clear answer. The ambassador looked around slowly, making eye contact with several key species. Their voice was calm and steady. "Earth has observed the situation carefully," they began. "We have taken note of the patterns, the behaviors, and the potential outcomes. While our history is not as long as many others in this room, we have learned that preparation, careful observation, and cooperation are essential to addressing challenges that affect all of us. We do not claim to have all the answers, but we are ready to contribute meaningfully and responsibly." The words were simple, but the delivery carried weight. There was no boastfulness, no arrogance, just clarity and calm confidence. Some council members shifted in their seats, surprised by the quiet authority in the ambassador's tone. Others frowned, unsure whether they should take it seriously. A few species, those who had initially doubted Earth, began to whisper quietly to one another. "They seem aware," one muttered. "They are watching us carefully," said another. It was subtle, but the reaction indicated that the ambassador had begun to change perceptions simply by listening and responding thoughtfully. As the meeting continued, the ambassador continued to observe. They noticed the alliances and tensions between species, the unspoken hierarchies, and the personal stakes of each representative. Some were concerned about reputation, some about resources, and some about maintaining power over the others. The ambassador quietly mapped all of this, recognizing patterns and potential opportunities to act if necessary. Despite the apparent chaos and arguments, the ambassador felt a sense of calm. Humans had faced internal conflicts on their own planet for centuries, often more chaotic than this meeting could ever become. They had learned how to remain composed under pressure, how to observe carefully, and how to make decisions based on understanding rather than emotion. All of these skills would be important in this setting, where mistakes could have consequences across the galaxy. At one point, a representative from a species known for their aggression and impatience leaned forward. "You are young," they said bluntly, "and yet you sit here quietly. Do you even understand the stakes? What makes you think you are prepared for this discussion?" The ambassador smiled faintly, a calm, knowing smile. They did not respond immediately. Instead, they let the question hang in the air, allowing the speaker's assumptions to become clear. Then, in a measured voice, they said, "Preparation is not only about history or experience. It is about understanding, observing, and anticipating what might happen. While we are young, we have studied each of your species carefully. We have considered the risks, the behaviors, and the potential outcomes. We are prepared to contribute in ways that are responsible and constructive." The room fell silent again. Some representatives exchanged uneasy glances. They had assumed Earth would be a weak voice in the conversation. Instead, they were realizing that this representative had knowledge, insight, and a level of calm focus that many of them lacked. The discussion moved on, But the ambassador had achieved something important. They had shifted the perception of Earth from being inexperienced to being attentive, thoughtful, and prepared. Even in a room full of centuries of experience, this quiet presence began to stand out. As the meeting continued, the ambassador kept observing. They noticed the subtle gestures, the moments of hesitation, the hidden alliances, and the unspoken fears. They saw how some species repeated arguments not because they were right, but because they feared losing control. They saw how others stayed silent, calculating the best moment to speak. And they saw how a few were genuinely curious, trying to understand the young planet that had suddenly become more interesting than anyone expected. By the end of this part of the discussion, the ambassador had done more than just listen. They had established a presence, one that was calm, steady, and deliberate. They had shown that Earth was not here to dominate or disrupt, but to participate thoughtfully. They had demonstrated that humans could remain composed even in a room full of doubt and tension. And quietly, without anyone realizing it yet, the ambassador had begun to change the way the council would perceive Earth in the discussions to come. The meeting continued, but something about the room had changed. The council members, who had been so confident in their assumptions, were now watching Earth's ambassador with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Even though no one had openly admitted it, they were beginning to realize that this representative was unlike the others they had encountered before. There was no loud display of power, no insistence on dominance, no desperate need to prove superiority. The calm presence of the ambassador seemed almost out of place, but it was precisely that calm that commanded attention. The ambassador remained seated, quietly observing the exchanges between other species. A tall, armored species argued passionately about the allocation of resources to the outer sectors. They believed that immediate action was necessary, that inaction could result in disaster. Their voice was sharp, and their gestures were forceful. Another species, smaller but no less intelligent, countered with caution. They argued that rushing into action without complete information could create unnecessary conflict. Many in the room began to raise their voices, repeating the same points over and over. It was a cycle of tension that the ambassador had seen countless times in human history. Arguments like this rarely solved anything. They only revealed the weaknesses, fears, and egos of those involved. The ambassador listened, noting how each species reacted to the others, which ones sought dominance, and which ones remained silent. Hiding behind caution. At one point, the room grew particularly tense. A representative from a species known for their strict hierarchies slammed their table with a forearm, demanding that the council take immediate action. Their voice echoed sharply, filling the chamber with an energy that made some species recoil slightly. The ambassador, however, remained perfectly still. They did not flinch, they did not raise a voice, and they did not appear intimidated in the slightest. The room, for all its noise and tension, seemed to settle slightly as eyes turned toward the calm figure from Earth. Several council members whispered to each other. "Why is this human so unshaken?" One asked quietly. Another replied, "They are either naive or extremely confident. I cannot tell which." The ambassador had no need to respond. Their calmness, their composure, spoke louder than words ever could. It was a presence that reminded everyone that confidence did not always have to be loud, that leadership was not always about raising your voice, and that understanding could be more powerful than fear. As the discussion continued, the council leader turned to the ambassador again. "Earth," they said, "we see that you are listening. Do you have any suggestions on how we might address these concerns without escalating tensions?" The ambassador took a moment, glancing around the room and making subtle notes of the expressions and postures of each species. Then they spoke, their voice even and measured. "Every species here has a perspective shaped by history, experience, and priorities. The challenge is to find solutions that recognize these differences while focusing on the common goal. Rushing, reacting out of fear, or trying to dominate others rarely creates lasting solutions. Observation, understanding, and carefully considered action are more effective. The simplicity of the words belied their impact. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the human was stating truths they had often ignored. Others nodded subtly, acknowledging the sense in the argument. The room, which had been thick with tension, seemed to breathe a little easier. One of the more aggressive species leaned forward, trying to challenge the ambassador. "You speak of observation and understanding," they said sharply, "but words alone do not protect us. How can Earth contribute if you are only watching and analyzing?" The ambassador smiled faintly, but not in arrogance. "Observation is not the same as inaction," they replied calmly. "Humans have faced countless challenges in their own history, learning that careful preparation and understanding often prevent mistakes. While Earth is young in interstellar affairs, we have studied each species here and their behavior patterns extensively. We are ready to act responsibly, but we also recognize that rash actions often create more problems than they solve." The council members murmured among themselves. For the first time, many of them began to see Earth not as inexperienced or naive, but as deliberate, thoughtful, and strategic. The ambassador had not boasted about power or technology, nor had they attempted to intimidate. They had simply presented the truth. Humans were prepared, not through aggression, but through careful planning and understanding. As the meeting went on, the ambassador continued to watch quietly. They noted the small tells, the way one species tensed when another mentioned resources, the way another shifted slightly when their past mistakes were referenced, the way minor species tried to stay unnoticed while still gathering information. Humans had always been skilled at observing patterns in behavior, and the ambassador used these skills to map the dynamics in the room. At one point, a heated exchange erupted between two rival species. One accused the other of ignoring threats, while the other claimed the first was exaggerating dangers for political gain. Voices rose, and the council leaders struggled to maintain order. The ambassador, however, did not intervene. Instead, they observed quietly, recognizing that the argument followed a predictable pattern. Humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best approach was to remain calm and let others reveal their intentions through their actions and words. While others argued, the ambassador began to think ahead. They considered what would happen if the situation escalated, what responses each species might take, and how humans could act in a way that was both responsible and effective. The advantage of being an outsider, someone not tied to centuries of rivalry or history, was clear. Humans could see patterns more objectively and make decisions without the same biases that influenced others. The council leader, noticing the ambassador's calm demeanor amidst chaos, spoke again. "Earth, your perspective is appreciated, but can you give a concrete example of how your species might handle a situation like this?" The ambassador paused, choosing words carefully. "In our history, humans have faced challenges that seemed impossible. We have often been underestimated, sometimes even dismissed. Yet through preparation, understanding, and careful action, we have overcome difficulties. While we cannot claim perfection, we have learned to anticipate possible outcomes, plan for contingencies, and act decisively when necessary. Our approach is not loud or aggressive, but it is effective." A few representatives exchanged impressed glances. Others frowned, still unsure how to interpret this calm confidence. The ambassador continued, speaking with clarity and honesty. "We do not underestimate the experience and knowledge present here. We respect it. But we also recognize that caution and preparedness are universal necessities. Every species, including our own, benefits from planning and understanding before taking action." The atmosphere in the room began to shift slowly. The aggressive interruptions decreased. The whispers became quieter, Some representatives even leaned forward, listening more intently. The ambassador had done something subtle but important. They had demonstrated that Earth was not reactive, not naive, and not easily intimidated. They had shown that humans were capable of contributing meaningfully to complex discussions. As the meeting progressed, the ambassador continued to observe, analyze, and contribute where appropriate. They noticed alliances forming, rivalries flaring, and strategies being tested in real time. Every movement, every word, every hesitation told a story. Humans had always been skilled at reading people, and now that skill was being applied on an interstellar scale. By the end of this part of the discussion, the ambassador had achieved a quiet but powerful success. They had shown that humans were calm under pressure, capable of understanding complex dynamics, and willing to act responsibly when necessary. They had not dominated the conversation, nor had they sought to impress through displays of power. Instead, they had simply been themselves, attentive, thoughtful, and prepared. And quietly, without any dramatic gestures or announcements. The ambassador began to change how the council members viewed Earth. No longer merely the new, inexperienced species in the room. Humans were starting to be seen as deliberate, strategic, and surprisingly capable. The meeting would continue, and challenges would come. But for this moment, Earth had earned a level of attention and respect that no one had expected. The ambassador's calm confidence had done what words alone could not. It had shifted perceptions, planted seeds of curiosity, and reminded every species that sometimes quiet observation and careful understanding were as powerful as any display of strength. The room had settled into a strange rhythm. Voices that had been loud and impatient earlier now spoke more cautiously. The arguments and interruptions had decreased, not because tensions had disappeared, but because the council members had begun to notice Earth's ambassador. Their calm, measured presence was a constant, subtle reminder that someone in the room was observing everything carefully. The discussion had shifted from accusations and disagreements to questions and clarifications. Representatives from various species outlined what they thought might be the next steps regarding the rising threat in the outer sector. Each species had its own way of presenting ideas, some aggressive, some defensive, some cautious, and some quiet. Yet every approach seemed predictable in its own way. Patterns that the ambassador had already seen coming. At one point, the council leader asked a direct question that had the potential to provoke strong reactions. If this threat reaches our borders, Earth, how will your planet respond? What measures have you taken to protect yourselves and others? A hush fell over the room. Some of the representatives leaned forward, curious to hear what the young species would say. Others shifted slightly, assuming that the Earth ambassador would offer little more than vague assurances. It was a natural expectation. They had underestimated Earth before, and many still believed humans lacked experience and resources. The ambassador took a deep breath and spoke calmly, without any trace of arrogance. Earth has considered many possible scenarios, they began. We have analyzed potential threats, the capabilities of other species, and the ways events might unfold. While our planet is still new to interstellar politics, we have prepared for a variety of outcomes. We do not take these matters lightly. There was a moment of silence. Some representatives exchanged glances, unsure what to make of the response. It was cautious but confident. It hinted at preparation without revealing specifics. Yet, in that calm delivery, there was an unmistakable weight that drew attention. One of the older, more skeptical species pressed further. Preparation alone is not enough. How can we be certain that Earth is capable of handling a situation that involves multiple species and far-reaching consequences? The ambassador leaned back slightly, their expression neutral. We have taken every species in this room into account, they said in a measured voice. Every plan, every strategy we have developed considers the behaviors, strengths, and potential actions of each species present. Our contingencies are designed not to harm, but to ensure safety and stability. We understand that cooperation and careful planning are essential to prevent mistakes. The room froze. Some of the council members did not respond immediately, trying to process what had just been said. Contingency plans. For every species. The words hung in the air like a sudden storm. The idea was unprecedented. No one had expected the young planet of Earth to have prepared for such complexity. Whispers began to spread quietly across the chamber. Did they just say, "Contingency plans for all of us"? One representative murmured. Another replied, "It must be an exaggeration. No young planet would think that far ahead." Yet the murmurs carried a note of unease. Even if the plans were intended as preventive measures, the idea that Earth had studied and prepared for every species in the room was powerful. The ambassador, sensing the reactions, continued in the same calm tone. "These plans are not meant to intimidate or assert dominance," they explained. "They are a reflection of Earth's belief in being prepared. Our history has taught us that understanding, anticipation, and preparation are the keys to surviving challenges and protecting what is important. We apply these principles to all situations, including this one." Some representatives exchanged uneasy glances. The concept was simple, yet profound. Here was a species that had been underestimated, and yet they had carefully considered how to respond to every potential action from every other species. Humans were not reckless nor naive. They were deliberate, calculating, and observant in ways that others had failed to expect. A few of the more cautious species leaned forward. "Can you give an example?" One asked, quietly, genuinely curious. "We do not seek secrets or technology, only reassurance." "How can Earth's approach be trusted?" The ambassador smiled faintly, not in arrogance, but with quiet assurance. "We cannot disclose every detail," they replied. "That is not the purpose of this discussion. What is important is that Earth does not act blindly. Our planning considers outcomes, reactions, and potential consequences. Every species here is accounted for in our approach. We do not seek conflict, only preparedness. Our goal is stability, not confrontation." The whispers grew louder, though still controlled. Some representatives were impressed, others worried. The casual nature in which the ambassador had delivered this revelation was perhaps the most striking part. There was no showmanship, no dramatic announcement, no threat. Just calm words that carried immense significance. A particularly aggressive species leaned back, frowning. "And you expect us to believe that a planet so young could have truly prepared for all of us? How can this be possible?" The ambassador's expression remained steady. "It is not a matter of age," they said. "It is a matter of attention, observation, and careful planning. Humans have long recognized that preparation prevents mistakes. We have studied the tendencies, strengths, and behaviors of every species in this room. Our plans are not about control. They are about ensuring that we respond responsibly to any challenge that may arise." The room was silent once more. Many representatives found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about Earth. A species that had seemed small and inexperienced was suddenly showing an understanding and readiness that few had anticipated. Some minor species, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, exchanged looks of cautious relief. If Earth had truly considered contingencies for all species, perhaps it could provide stability in uncertain situations. Some of the larger, more dominant species, however, were not yet convinced. They were curious, cautious, and maybe a little unsettled by the calm confidence of the young planet. The council leader, sensing the tension and the significance of this moment, spoke carefully. "Earth, your approach is unexpected. You have listened, analyzed, and now shared a level of preparation that none of us anticipated. It is clear that your perspective is different from what many of us expected. Please continue." The ambassador nodded, maintaining the same calm tone. "We understand that trust must be earned," they said. "Our goal is to demonstrate that Earth is a reliable partner, one that values careful planning, observation, and responsible action. We do not act impulsively, and we do not assume that our way is the only way. Our contingency plans exist to protect life, maintain stability, and prevent unnecessary harm. That is all." Some representatives exchanged glances. Others remained silent, thinking carefully. Even the aggressive species had paused, realizing that Earth's approach was methodical, deliberate, and entirely different from what they expected in that moment. The Council realized that Earth was not merely a participant. It was a species capable of thinking ahead, capable of understanding the complexities of multiple civilizations, and capable of preparing for outcomes that no one else had considered. The revelation had been delivered casually, almost offhand, but the impact was profound. The room's energy shifted subtly. Some representatives were intrigued, some cautious, some impressed, and some uneasy. But all were now aware of one undeniable fact. Humans were not to be underestimated. The ambassador continued to observe quietly, knowing that the calm delivery of this information was more effective than any display of force. The subtlety of the revelation, the careful phrasing, and the steady presence ensured that the message would be remembered long after the meeting ended, even as discussions moved on to other topics. The idea of Earth's comprehensive preparation lingered. It was an unspoken reality now, one that colored every interaction, every glance, and every consideration in the room. Some species were already beginning to think about how this young planet could influence future decisions. Others wondered how far humans could go if their preparation extended even further. The ambassador, meanwhile, remained composed, quietly observing, listening, and thinking. The casual disclosure had been delivered with no fanfare, no drama, and no need for validation. The room had taken notice, and that was all that mattered. For the first time, Earth's presence in the Council was no longer seen as insignificant. Humans had shown that they were capable of understanding, planning, and acting in ways that others had not expected. And quietly, without anyone fully realizing it, the balance of perception had shifted. The room would continue to discuss strategy, risk, and cooperation, but the seed had been planted. A young species, underestimated by most, had revealed a level of preparation that made every other member of the Council pause and reconsider. Earth was no longer just a new participant. Earth had quietly announced that it was prepared, aware, and ready to act responsibly in ways that considered every species present. And that, in itself, was a revelation powerful enough to change the course of the conversation forever. The moment had passed, yet the weight of what the Earth ambassador had said still lingered in the council chamber. The casual revelation that Earth had contingency plans for every species in the room had shifted the energy in ways no one had anticipated. Conversations that had once been confident and dismissive now carried a subtle uncertainty. Some representatives leaned closer to each other, whispering quietly, while others sat rigidly, trying to mask surprise and concern. Even those who were initially skeptical couldn't ignore the implications. A planet that had been underestimated, dismissed as inexperienced and naive, had just demonstrated foresight and preparation that rivaled or exceeded many older species. The room had gone from quiet curiosity to low-level tension as every member began to reassess Earth's potential. The ambassador, sitting calmly, observed the room without interrupting. They had expected some reaction, some shock, some doubt, but they had not needed to force attention or demonstrate superiority. Humans had learned through history that quiet confidence often spoke louder than any argument, and that understanding behavior before acting gave a powerful advantage. A representative from one of the more aggressive species leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You have plans for all of us?" they asked cautiously, almost as if testing the statement. How is that even possible for a planet as young as yours?" The ambassador tilted their head slightly, maintaining a calm expression. "It is not about age," they said. "It is about careful observation, learning from history, and anticipating outcomes. Humans have studied the tendencies, reactions, and priorities of every species here. Our plans are designed to act responsibly and prevent unnecessary harm. They are not meant to dominate or threaten anyone. They exist to ensure stability and safety." Whispers rippled quietly across the chamber. Some representatives looked genuinely impressed. Others were uneasy, realizing that Earth had seen patterns in behavior that many had assumed were invisible to outsiders. A few minor species, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, exchanged subtle glances of relief. They had been unsure about Earth's capacity to act responsibly, but now they felt a cautious sense of reassurance. One of the older species, known for being particularly controlling, straightened in their seat and spoke with a tone that tried to mask concern. "You claim to have prepared for every species here. Do you really expect us to take that at face value? Are these plans theoretical or actionable?" The ambassador's response was steady and precise. "They are actionable," they said. "We have analyzed potential scenarios, studied reactions, and considered possible outcomes. The goal is not to control or coerce, but to ensure that decisions are made with awareness of the consequences. Humans have learned that preparation prevents unnecessary mistakes and protects life. That principle guides all our plans." A few representatives leaned forward, intrigued. The casual tone with which the ambassador had delivered this revelation contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the content. No one had expected such clarity, such foresight, and such humility in the same moment. Some of the more dominant species exchanged quiet words, their voices low but tense. "They are more capable than we thought," one murmured. "We underestimated them." Another replied, "We need to be careful. If Earth is this prepared, it changes the dynamics entirely." The ambassador continued to observe without interrupting, noticing subtle reactions. The aggressive species were now calculating their next moves more carefully. The cautious species were leaning in, genuinely interested in learning more. The minor species seemed relieved, sensing that the presence of Earth might stabilize uncertain situations rather than complicate them. One representative, still skeptical, tried to challenge the ambassador directly. "And what about cooperation?" they asked. "If these plans exist for all species, how do we know they are not biased toward your own advantage?" The ambassador's calm expression did not waver. "The plans are not about advantage," they replied. "They are about responsible action. Humans have learned that no one benefits when decisions are made impulsively or without understanding. Every scenario considers the well-being of others, because stability and cooperation are necessary for survival. If every species acts without preparation, mistakes become inevitable. Our goal is to prevent that." The room fell silent for a few moments. Even the skeptical representative seemed to pause, realizing that the answer was more about logic and principle than negotiation or persuasion. It was not a boast. It was an explanation rooted in observation, analysis, and responsibility. A few representatives from minor species, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, spoke softly, almost nervously. "If what Earth says is true, then perhaps their presence here is more significant than we assumed." Their words carried a mix of relief and curiosity. They were beginning to see the value in having humans participate in decisions, not just as observers, but as active, thoughtful contributors. The ambassador's calm presence was having a subtle but profound effect. Representatives who had initially doubted Earth were reconsidering their assumptions. They had expected a young planet with limited history to be reactive, unprepared, or careless. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that had thought ahead, anticipated potential problems, and created systems to respond responsibly. Some of the larger, more dominant species leaned back, silently acknowledging that Earth could no longer be dismissed. They could sense that the young planet's approach was both deliberate and strategic. Humans were not reckless, and they were not naive. They were observers, planners, and actors who considered consequences before taking steps. The council leader, sensing the importance of this moment, addressed the chamber. Earth has shared a perspective that none of us expected. While we may not yet understand the full scope of these plans, it is clear that the young planet has prepared thoughtfully. This requires us to reconsider not only our assumptions, but also how we approach cooperation and decision-making. Murmurs of agreement spread quietly. Even the aggressive species, who had earlier been dismissive, seemed to pause in thought. Some were calculating new strategies. Others were simply trying to understand the implications. The revelation had created a shift, one that was subtle but undeniable. The ambassador remained composed, listening carefully as representatives asked follow-up questions. They spoke with clarity, providing reassurance without revealing specifics. They emphasized principles: responsibility, preparedness, understanding, and cooperation. Each answer reinforced the idea that Earth was deliberate, considerate, and capable of acting effectively in complex situations. Some species began to see the advantage of working with humans. "They are careful," one whispered to another. "They notice patterns that we sometimes miss. If we align with them, we may avoid mistakes." Others remained cautious, not yet fully trusting, but acknowledging that Earth could not be ignored, that the atmosphere in the room had changed. What had begun as skepticism and doubt had transformed into cautious respect. Representatives were still wary, still curious, but they could not deny that Earth had demonstrated thoughtfulness and preparedness far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Even as the meeting continued, the impact of the casual revelation remained. Discussions that followed were more measured. Representatives chose their words carefully, knowing that Earth had anticipated many of their typical responses. The ambassador's calm demeanor continued to influence the tone, reducing unnecessary tension and encouraging more deliberate conversation. The shift was not immediate, but it was clear. Earth was no longer just a new participant in the council. Humans had shown that they were capable of thinking ahead, capable of understanding complex dynamics, and capable of preparing for outcomes that no one else had considered. The council members had begun to recognize that this young planet could play a significant role in future decisions. The ambassador remained quiet, observing the room and letting the impact of their words settle. They had not sought attention or praise. They had not tried to dominate or impress. They had simply shared a truth, calmly and thoughtfully, allowing the council to see Earth's capacity for preparedness and responsible action. By the end of this part of the discussion, the council chamber had changed. Some species were impressed. Some were cautious. Some were reconsidering past assumptions. And all were aware that humans had quietly established a presence that could not be ignored. The revelation of contingency plans for every species had done more than shock the room. It had shifted perceptions, influenced strategies, and reminded every representative that humans were capable of foresight, responsibility, and thoughtful action. The impact of this moment would be felt long after the meeting ended, shaping the way Earth was seen and the way decisions were made. The ambassador remained composed, quietly listening as discussions continued. They had achieved what they came to do. They had shown that humans were not naive, not reactive, and not easily underestimated. Earth was a serious participant, and the council could no longer ignore their presence. The day's events had begun with skepticism, tension, and doubt. By the time the discussions moved toward practical strategies and cooperation, the young planet had quietly claimed a place of respect. And all it had taken was calm observation, thoughtful preparation, and... As the meeting progressed into its later hours, the atmosphere in the council chamber had completely transformed. The casual revelation from Earth's ambassador that humans had contingency plans for every species in the room had set a quiet but undeniable shift in motion. No one spoke loudly, no one interrupted recklessly, and even the aggressive representatives chose their words carefully. The energy was no longer charged with dismissiveness or doubt. It had shifted into cautious respect. The ambassador continued to observe silently, taking in every subtle movement and every change in expression. Humans had learned long ago that leadership was not about controlling others, but about understanding them, anticipating reactions, and responding with clarity and patience. The calm presence in the room was as much a statement as the words that had been spoken earlier. The council leader, sensing the impact of Earth's words, addressed the chamber. It is clear that Earth has considered the complexities present in this council in ways we did not expect. Their approach emphasizes preparation, observation, and responsibility. Perhaps it is time we think carefully not only about the outer sectors, but also about how we work together as species moving forward. A murmur of agreement rippled quietly through the chamber. Some representatives nodded subtly. Others still hesitated, unsure how to process the realization that Earth was more capable than many had assumed. The casual, calm manner of the ambassador had made the revelation more striking. It was not presented as a threat, yet the implications were undeniable. The ambassador's eyes moved slowly around the room, noting the reactions. The aggressive species, who had initially tried to challenge them, now seemed thoughtful, reconsidering the assumptions they had made. The more cautious species leaned in slightly, intrigued by the potential for collaboration with humans. Even the smaller or minor species, who had been silent for most of the meeting, appeared reassured that Earth's preparedness could bring stability rather than chaos. A representative from a species known for its wisdom spoke quietly, almost to themselves, but loud enough for nearby members to hear. They are calm, deliberate, prepared. We may have underestimated them, and that could have been a mistake. Others whispered in agreement. The room, which had been tense earlier, was now filled with an undercurrent of curiosity and respect. Humans were no longer outsiders or novices. They had demonstrated understanding, foresight, and responsibility qualities that resonated across species. Regardless of size, age, or history. The council leader turned once more to the ambassador. Earth, your approach has had a profound effect on this council. How do you suggest we proceed, considering the challenges ahead? The ambassador took a moment, observing carefully before answering. The challenges ahead require cooperation, understanding, and careful action, they said, their voice calm and steady. Preparation is important, but so is listening. Every species has experience, insight, and knowledge that we can learn from. We are ready to contribute responsibly and act in ways that support stability and shared success. The goal should always be prevention of unnecessary mistakes, rather than reactive measures after problems have grown. A hush fell over the room. The logic and calm clarity of the words made an impact. Representatives realized that Earth was advocating not for power, not for dominance, but for responsibility and collaboration. The approach was simple, yet profound. Humans were not trying to impress or intimidate. They were demonstrating that foresight, patience, and understanding could be more powerful than loud arguments or aggressive tactics. The aggressive species who had questioned Earth earlier shifted in their seat. Their words are simple, one whispered to another, yet the implications are significant. They see patterns we may have missed, and they have prepared for scenarios we never expected. Even some of the historically cautious species began to lean in slightly, intrigued by what humans had to offer. "Perhaps working with them is wise," one murmured. "They are capable of thinking ahead in ways that could stabilize these discussions in the situations we face." Throughout the rest of the meeting, the ambassador remained calm and attentive, offering input only when necessary and focusing primarily on listening. The subtle power of this approach became increasingly apparent. By maintaining composure, humans had allowed other species to reveal their true priorities, strengths, and weaknesses. The ambassador had quietly mapped the dynamics of the council, gaining insight without creating confrontation or mistrust. The council began to move from debate to discussion, considering practical strategies for the outer sectors. Representatives who had been quick to argue or dismiss one another now collaborated more carefully. Ideas were weighed, scenarios considered, and solutions proposed with greater thoughtfulness. Earth's presence had changed the tone entirely. The ambassador quietly noted the alliances forming and the shifts in attitude. Some species were aligning with Earth in subtle ways, recognizing that humans had a perspective that valued foresight and stability. Others remained cautious, still calculating potential risks. But even they were beginning to respect the deliberate nature of Earth's approach. As the meeting drew toward a conclusion, the council leader addressed the room. "Today, we have learned more than expected. Earth's perspective has reminded us of the importance of preparation, observation, and responsibility. Moving forward, we must all consider not only the immediate challenges, but also how our actions affect one another." The room was quiet, but the weight of the statement was felt by everyone. Earth had not only contributed practical insight, but had subtly shifted the way the council thought about cooperation, strategy, and responsibility. The casual revelation of contingency plans had opened the eyes of many representatives to a level of preparation and thoughtfulness they had not anticipated. As the meeting concluded, the ambassador stood and gathered their belongings, moving calmly toward the exit. Representatives watched, some with curiosity, some with admiration, and some with lingering uncertainty. Humans had arrived as outsiders, underestimated by most, but they were leaving as participants whose presence could no longer be ignored. A few minor species approached cautiously. "Your words today," one began, hesitating slightly. "They have changed our perspective. Earth has shown that preparation and responsibility matter." "Thank you." The ambassador nodded gently. "Thank you," they replied. "We are all learning from each other. Cooperation is most effective when each of us respects the perspectives and experiences of others." In the hallways outside the chamber, whispers continued. The story of Earth's preparedness would spread quickly among the council. The casual, almost understated revelation had created ripples that would influence future meetings, alliances, and decisions. Humans had quietly demonstrated that foresight, patience, and careful observation were strengths that could not be underestimated. By the time the ambassador returned to their shuttle, they were met with subtle recognition from several officers and aides. There was respect, curiosity, and an unspoken acknowledgement that Earth had proven itself capable of playing a meaningful role in interstellar affairs. Humans had arrived as novices, yet they had left a lasting impression that few would forget. As the shuttle departed the station, the ambassador allowed themselves a moment to reflect. The day had been long, challenging, and filled with subtle tensions, but it had also been a success. Humans had demonstrated that intelligence, calm observation, and careful planning could speak louder than any demonstration of force or authority. They had shown that preparation and responsibility could win respect. Even in a room filled with centuries of experience, the galaxy was vast, and Earth was still young. But one thing was clear: humans were capable of understanding, anticipating, and contributing in ways that others had underestimated. The casual revelation of contingency plans for every species had done more than surprise the council. It had established humans as a thoughtful, prepared, and capable presence. As the stars passed by outside the shuttle window, the ambassador knew that this was only the beginning. Earth had gained a foothold, earned respect, and demonstrated capability. The lessons of observation, careful planning, and calm confidence would continue to guide humans as they navigated the complexities of interstellar politics. And quietly, without boasting or demanding recognition, Earth had begun to change the galaxy's perception of its people. The council members would remember this day, not for dramatic speeches, not for displays of power, but for the calm, deliberate presence of a species that had quietly but firmly proven that preparation, understanding, and responsibility mattered more than anyone had imagined. It was a new beginning. Humans had arrived, and the galaxy had noticed.